Good evening, everybody. My name is Koh Sui Yen. I head the International Arbitration Department of Wong Partnership. First, welcome Judge Bogdan Orescu, Solicitor General Daphne Hong, Ambassador, distinguished colleagues, guests, and friends. In my capacity as the President of the International Law Association Singapore branch, we warmly welcome you to this evening's discussion. Also, in my capacity on behalf of Wong Partnership, many of our colleagues who are here today, we also like to welcome you. We are very honored to host Judge Orescu of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice in Singapore. This evening, he'll be discussing the work and the activity of the ILC on sea level rise in relation to international law, and also share with us the key pronouncements of the ICJ advisory opinion on climate change, the obligations of states. This was issued on 23rd July 2025, and we're very fortunate that his visit comes months after this landmark decision. And should I say more accurately, advisory opinion. The advisory opinion clarifies that customary international law imposes binding obligations on states to take preventive and precautionary measures to avoid climate harm, including through the regulation of private actors. A failure to provide foreseeable harm caused by greenhouse gas emissions can constitute a wrongful act that's attributable to the state. The implications of the advisory opinion thus extend beyond governments. It actually affects individuals, all of us here, companies, institutions, and it will definitely shape policy and regulatory approaches globally. And for us, Singapore, I think this discussion is extremely pertinent. We are a city-state, highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We've always had a firm commitment to international law and climate change issues. In fact, Singapore was among the countries that supported Vanuatu's request to the ICJ to clarify this very question, and we further made submissions on this. And I think with that, I would say we are very privileged to have this opportunity to hear directly from Judge Orescu. I just found a little connection. He happens to be the president of the Romanian branch of International Law Association. So I did then explain to him our efforts in our biennial conference that's coming up in 2028. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Nilofer Ora, Director of Center of International Law, who will moderate the discussion. And also we have Ms. Diane Tan, who's very involved in this issue of climate change, the Deputy Director General, AGC Singapore, to be the discussant of today's topic. With that, I pass the time over to Nilofer.
And it really is my great pleasure to be a moderator on this with a very distinguished guest, Judge Bogdan Orescu, whom I've known for a number of years now, because he was also a member, a very distinguished member of the International Law Commission, and we were co-chairs of the Sea Level Rise Study Group and actually co-authors of the report concerning law of the sea. But he has an amazing career that we can all envy. In addition to being professor of international law at the Romanian Law School, he also served as foreign minister to Romania when he was working on sea level rise. And I assure you, he didn't miss a beat on that as he's flying around. Also, of course, he was advisor to the president. Now I learned, I didn't know either, president of ILA in Romania, and of course, judge in the International Court of Justice. So I couldn't be more privileged and pleased that he's with us today, accepted our invitation, and I look forward to hearing what he has to say about sea level rise. Judge Orescu?
Well, thank you so much for this kind presentation. And I'm very happy to be here today in Singapore at the Center of International Law at the National University for this lecture. And not only, because we'll have meetings tomorrow, and I'll be privileged to meet the researchers of the center and have other meetings with Singaporean officials. And I'm happy to be here for a number of a multitude of very good reasons. On one hand, I would like to say that I like the beauty of Singapore and its people. It is my third visit. I think last time I was here, I was as foreign minister back in March 2023, together with my president during a state visit to celebrate the 55th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. Second, because I admire the strong commitment of Singapore for international law, the fact that this country, as a small state, is such a steadfast supporter of the international rule of law is already a proven reality. And the existence here of this prestigious center is just a confirmation that speaks volumes. Third, it is my greatest honor and privilege to meet again here its director, the excellent jurist, Professor Niloufar Oral, my great friend and former ILC colleague. I'm extremely happy to have her as moderator of this event. Fourth, it is a special occasion that I have the privilege to speak today about this topic, very close to my heart, sea level rise in international law, since together with Niloufar, as she said, we have worked together quite hard, first as proponents of the inclusion of the topic of sea level rise on the agenda of the International Law Commission, but also as co-chairs of the study group of the Commission on Sea Level Rise in relation to international law for, I think, more than 7 years altogether. And we have worked on the law of the sea aspects related to this topic. Fifth, I cannot but remember with immense pleasure my first visit to Singapore in November 2019 to discuss together the co-chairs of the study group how to shape the destiny of this topic within the ILC, and to take part at a round table on sea level rise and law of the sea organized by CIL with regional representatives. And indeed, we were at the very beginning of our work. The topic was just included on the active agenda of the Commission, and Niloufar and I, we were just preparing to start drafting the first issues paper, the first document on the topic focusing on law of the sea aspects of sea level rise. And this was produced in February 2020. And last but not least, since last year, the Commission has adopted its final report, and also the ICJ in the already famous advisory opinion on obligations of states in respect of climate change, has for the first time in the history of international law and the history of this issue made some pronouncements, very important pronouncements on sea level rise. So I do feel like I'm here to close a circle, a very relevant circle. So allow me to feel a lot of emotions, but very positive, good emotions, shared with very good friends. And to speak before you about sea level rise as approached by the International Court of Justice, by the International Law Commission, and of course, in turn, to tackle the purpose, the journey, and the outcome of this great journey. And allow me to note at the very beginning that for me, personally, this was the most, or one of the most, meaningful undertakings of my professional life. An intersection between law, science, diplomacy, with impact inter alia on the very survival of entire nations and their people, on essential rights on which their existence depends, and affecting in a way or another 2/3 of the states of the international community. The ICJ advisory opinion of the 23rd of July 2025 represents, I dare say, the terminus point of this journey for the time being. We'll see about that. And the most recent evolution on this topic in international law. It is also for the first time that an international court, and indeed it is the World Court, has addressed the legal implications of sea level rise, and it did it substantially and meaningfully. So I will first speak about the pronouncements of the court in this landmark opinion, and I pause here just a second to say that my thoughts about these pronouncements, and as a matter of fact, this entire presentation represent my personal views and do not engage the court in any way. Now, since the phenomenon of sea level rise is a direct negative consequence of climate change, it is no surprise why the opinion, which is on obligations of state in respect of climate change, included a dedicated section on this issue. But it was also due to the great interest of states for this issue and for the court's legal view on it. Indeed, as reflected in one paragraph 355 of the opinion, I quote from that paragraph, "The court took note of the strong concerns of states regarding the implications of sea level rise for the stability of maritime zones, of their positions, that sea level rise must not diminish maritime entitlements, and that existing baselines, delimitations, and statehood should be preserved despite physical changes." It also, the court, took note about the positions expressed that the complete submergence of territory should not deprive states of their maritime entitlements. End of quote. These are very relevant observations which encapsulate the very reasons why identifying solutions, concrete legal measures, to counter the effects of sea level rise is so important for the affected states. Indeed, as you well know, sea level rise affects the coasts because due to it are pushed landward, and therefore sea level rise affects the baselines, and very importantly the maritime zones which are measured from the baselines, the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone. In this way, the coastal states' entitlements to these areas are threatened, and the access to the resources from these areas are also threatened. Is also threatened. These maritime zones, which are part either of the territorial sea or are located beyond state territory, but in which the riparian states exercise sovereign rights and jurisdiction, such as the contiguous zone and the exclusive economic zone, they are essential for the economic and political interests of the coastal states. The loss of resources on which the littoral populations depend may prompt, of course, increased competition and political disputes, even conflicts. And this is a reality that, of course, we have to take into account. This also may prompt a deterioration of living conditions, the displacement of populations, and forced migration. Sea level rise also impacts the critical coastal infrastructure. And most importantly, the state territory could become fully submerged or fully uninhabitable. So because all of this, sea level rise is perceived as a physical existential threat for low-lying coastal states and especially for small island developing states. Thus, coming back to the advisory opinion, the court noted in paragraph 357 the effects of sea level rise on territorial integrity, on permanent sovereignty over the natural resources, and on the exercise of the right to self-determination, also acknowledging the interconnection between these principles. Further, after analyzing UNCLOS provisions, the court noted that there is no provision in the convention requiring states parties to update baselines, charts, or lists of geographical coordinates. This was in paragraph 359, while the text of paragraph 362 is perhaps the most eloquent, and it is also unequivocal. The court considers that the provisions of UNCLOS do not require states parties in the context of physical changes resulting from climate change-related sea level rise to update their charts or lists of geographical coordinates, thus that show the baselines and outer limit lines of their maritime zones once they have been duly established in conformity with the convention. For this reason, states parties to UNCLOS are under no obligation to update such charts or lists of geographical coordinates. End of quote. There is here a small difference between what we have worked in the International Law Commission study group and what the pronouncement of the court included. The pronouncement of the court refers only to states parties to UNCLOS, while for various reasons, which are explained in detail in our work in the Commission, we have concluded that this obligation extends not just to the parties to UNCLOS, but to all states. Well, this is nevertheless an important, essential pronouncement that confirms a key finding of the Commission, and which finds its origin in the first issues paper that, together with Nulifer, we have written and co-authored back in 2020, more precisely in paragraph 104, a famous paragraph of that first issues paper. I will come back later on the ILC work on the topic. I only regret, as I stated in my separate opinion to the advisory opinion, that the court fell short on recognizing that fixed baselines in the context of sea level rise has already become part of the customary international law, as demonstrated in my separate opinion. Because the practice supporting the permanency of maritime boundaries extended in a dynamic manner in the past 5 to 6 years. So it was a very dynamic, very rapid development. So since at least 2020, this developed not only in the Pacific region or in Southeast Asia. They were the first, in fact, as we have mentioned already in our first issues paper, but also in other regions of the world. And the number of states involved in this practice increased exponentially. Numerous states in their submissions to the ILC and in their statements before the Sixth Committee on this topic have expressed the same view, that rejects the theory of ambulatory baselines and have informed that in the context of the effects of sea level rise, their national practice is not to update the coordinates of baselines once they have been submitted, and have strongly supported the principle of legal stability in connection with this practice. Some states have also invoked their national legislation, explicitly supporting the principle of immutability of baselines. Such positions were also expressed during the debates in the Security Council on various occasions, but also in the General Assembly debates organized most recently in 2024, but also in 2023, when in November the General Assembly organized the first such dedicated debate. Moreover, the statements presented in the Sixth Committee of the General Assembly were not only on behalf of Pacific Island Forum and its member states or AOSIS, but also from many states, from Asia, from America, from Africa, and European states. No states, even those that have in their national legislation the provisions establishing ambulatory baselines, have objected or contested the solution of fixed baselines in the context of sea level rise. There are also several collective declarations which have been issued by regional bodies rejecting the ambulatory baselines theory and supporting the fixed baseline solution, and there is therefore a clear, uniform, I dare say, identical practice, which is also frequent, it is widespread, by a very large number of states from all regions of the world. And these states perceive the solution of fixed baselines not just a matter of policy discretion or political commitment, but the expression of legal obligation in international law and in accordance with international law. At present, there are over 100 states expressly acknowledging that baselines must remain fixed at their current coordinates, irrespective of physical changes which may be brought by sea level rise, and all of them are convinced that by doing so, they are in strict compliance with their legal obligations, because UNCLOS does not obligate states to update coordinates or charts regarding baselines. The abundance and high frequency of state practice in all regions of the world indicate in an obvious and convincing manner, in my view, without any shadow of doubt, that the opinio juris has already crystallized. And again, there is no state objecting to that, which consolidates, of course, in a powerful manner this conclusion. But the ICJ findings do not stop here. There is also an important paragraph, 363 of the advisory opinion, noting the views of participants to the proceedings that sea level rise poses a significant threat to the territorial integrity and thus to the very statehood of small island states, and that in the event of the complete loss of states' territory and the displacement of its population, a strong presumption in favor of continued statehood should apply. And then the court concluded, I quote, "In the view of the court, once a state is established, the disappearance of one of its constituent elements would not necessarily entail the loss of statehood," end of quote. This is another crucial pronouncement of the court, which is also the first confirmation, again, by an international court, and very importantly by the World Court, of this strong presumption of the continuity of statehood, which was thoroughly reasoned by the ILC in its work on the topic. As I stated in my separate opinion, the fact that the advisory opinion refers to the disappearance of one of the constituent elements of states does not mean that in the context of sea level rise, the submergence of state territory, which brings about also the displacement of the population. Well, this should not be seen in a restrictive mathematic manner. I mean, one element which brings about also the disappearance of the other element, well, makes the presumption as strong as only one element disappearing. Well, I also find important to add that even the opinion does not add this, but I have mentioned this in my separate opinion to the opinion. Well, the consequence of this finding, of this pronouncement, is also very important, and it is about the maintenance of the membership of international organizations, including the United Nations. The disappearance of one or more of the initial constituent elements does not and cannot may affect the existing membership of international organizations. Paragraph 364 of the advisory opinion also mentions the legal obligation of cooperation to address the adverse effects of sea level rise based on the need for solidarity. And it also mentions that cooperation in addressing sea level rise is not a matter of choice for states, but a legal obligation. Then in paragraph 365, the court emphasized the legal obligation of cooperation among states to achieve equitable solutions, taking into account the rights of affected states and their populations. Basically, this paragraph wants to stress the fact that sea level rise solutions, as envisaged by the court in this advisory opinion, mean that the rights of states, the existing rights of states, should be preserved, because this is in accordance with the requirements of equity. Last but not least, in paragraph 378 of the opinion, the court reaffirmed the principle of non-refoulement in the context of climate change-induced displacement, which represents a vital protection for persons facing existential risks. One should also add, with reference to this component of the protection of persons, the very important conclusions by the court with regard to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. In the opinion, the court concluded that this right is a precondition for the enjoyment of other rights, such as the right to life, the right to health, the right to an adequate standard of living, including access to water, food, and housing. And these are rights which are very much affected by sea level rise. And the court also stated that it is difficult to see how the obligations of states to guarantee the effective enjoyment of such rights can be fulfilled without at the same time ensuring the protection of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. And of course, the court did not miss to say that the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is inherent, therefore, in the enjoyment of other human rights, and that under international law, this human right is essential for the enjoyment of other human rights. All these pronouncements of the court are very important. They cover essential aspects of the three main components of the topic: law of the sea, statehood, and protection of persons affected by sea level rise, and confirm in essence with the authority of the World Court the previous findings of the ILC. As a matter of fact, the court in paragraph 361 of the opinion expressed its awareness regarding the work undertaken by the ILC on sea level rise in relation to international law since 2018, and referred to the final report of the study group adopted by the Commission in its 2025 session. And this brings me to the important work of the ILC on sea level rise, which started in 2018. And of course you will ask, what prompted the Commission to embark on this great journey? A journey that I was deeply privileged to share with my colleagues and dear friends within the ILC, Nilüfer Ünal, Patricia Galvão-Teles, and Juan José Ruda Santolaria, who were very active on this topic, and also with our colleague Jakuba Sisse. Indeed, we did not start our effort in a vacuum. It was a growing awareness about the threat of sea level rise and a relevant preceding work of the International Law Association. And I'm glad that the International Law Association, the Singapore branch, is supporting this event. And also as a president of the Romanian branch, I'm very glad that I can speak about the important contribution of the International Law Association in the field of sea level rise. But before that, I must say that UNCLOS Travaux Préparatoires revealed that no trace of concern about sea level rise was expressed at that time when UNCLOS was being negotiated. The negotiators of the Law of the Sea Convention were not aware of the threat of sea level rise. And sea level rise as a negative effect of climate change was not perceived as a factor to be addressed in UNCLOS. This awareness only appeared at the beginning of the 90s. 1990 was the first year when the first assessment report of the IPCC, which was established only 2 years before, in 1988, came up. And this first assessment report included the findings that sea level rise effects have been produced already in the 20th century at an increased rate compared to what happened in the 19th century. It also included the findings that the ocean thermal expansion and the mass loss from glaciers were the main contributors to the 20th century rise. It also mentioned that during the 21st century, the rate of rise was projected to be faster than during the 20th century, and that even if sea level rise will not be uniform around the world, it would continue to rise well after the GHG emissions are reduced. So these were findings in the first assessment report of the IPCC, and they prompted a lot of interest about this issue. Also, the first solid scholarly articles and studies on sea level rise about the legal implications were published in 1990 and 1991. And I mentioned here the articles by David Caron, by Fred Sooms, by David Freestone, and many others who started to work on this issue and to think of the solutions. And not just scientists and international law scholars started to be aware at the beginning of the 90s, but also states, especially those likely to be directly affected. 1989, so a year before the first IPCC assessment report, was the year of the famous Malé Declaration on global warming and sea level rise, which was adopted in November that year in the Maldives by 14 small island states. And that declaration stated in a clear manner the connection between the increased concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and climate change and sea level rise, and stressed that even in the case of a standstill of this increase, sea level rise would continue to rise. It also showed that sea level rise would cause extensive damage to the land and infrastructure and even threaten the survival of some island states, and also made a series of very concrete proposals. So this was already in 1989. When Nilofer, myself, and the other colleagues, who were the proponents of the inclusion of this topic on the agenda of the International Law Commission, were campaigning for the first election for the Commission in 2016, we became aware of the great interest of the states directly affected, especially small island, but also low-lying coastal states, and about their acute concerns, about finding the legal solutions to the legal effects of sea level rise, to identify possible avenues to counter these negative consequences. Also in 2016, a year before the concrete efforts we have started within the Commission to promote the inclusion of the topic, the IPCC Assessment Report 5 was projecting global mean sea level rise of up to approximately 1 meter by 2100. 98 centimeters was the projection at that time. In 2015, the Tapuatea Declaration on Climate Change, adopted by the Polynesian Leaders Group, was already mentioning the adverse impacts of climate change, which are a threat to territorial integrity, security, and sovereignty. I'm quoting from that text. And in some cases, to the very existence of some of our islands because of the submersion of existing land and the regression of our maritime heritage. And was acknowledging under UNCLOS the importance of exclusive economic zones, whose areas are calculated according to emerged lands, and, very importantly, permanently established the baselines in accordance with the UNCLOS without taking into account sea level rise. So this was already going on, and we were at that time, we started to become aware of the importance of the topic and how to involve the International Law Commission in this work. But I also have, as I mentioned, the duty to express here our acknowledgement about the important work which was already been undertaken by the International Law Association. The International Law Association started to examine the topic already in 2012 in a dedicated committee, International Law and Sea Level Rise. In 2016, a first interim report was already adopted, followed by another one in 2018. And I think this work has to be acknowledged because it is very important, and it served as a basis for our efforts within the International Law Commission. So this was the general context in which, following our election, we started to actively promote the inclusion of the topic on the ILC agenda. So in October 2017, at the permanent mission of Romania in New York, we, for the first time, tested the feasibility of the ILC taking up this topic with representatives of around 35 member states, and the reactions were quite positive. So as a result, we have proceeded, and in 2018 we have prepared a syllabus which was the basis for the inclusion of the topic in the long-term work program of the Commission. In 2019, we convinced the Commission as a whole to adopt the decision for including the topic on the active agenda and to create a study group that we co-chaired. The mandate of the study group was, according to the syllabus, to undertake a mapping exercise concerning the legal questions raised by sea level rise and interrelated issues in order to assist states in developing practicable solutions to respond effectively to the legal issues arising from sea level rise. I dare say it was one of the fastest, if not the fastest, inclusion of a topic on the active work program of the ILC. And this is against the background of the reality that the process of inclusion of a topic on the ILC agenda is not easy. Sometimes it takes years between the inclusion of a topic on the long-term program and its acceptance on the current agenda. And I speak here also under the control of Marie Jacobson, and I'm acknowledging her presence here together with us. It's a privilege that you are attending this event. Sometimes, as we know, the second step doesn't even occur. So there are topics including on the long-term work program, and then for various reasons, for instance, because states do not support the inclusion of the topic, those topics are never included. Or sometimes the topic is too political, or it's too technical, or states do not express interest in supporting that. So there are various reasons why. This also brings me to, I think, a relevant lesson learned from our work on this topic in the Commission. Whenever there is urgency in finding legal solutions, the ILC must promptly include that topic on its agenda without delay. And I think this might show efficiency in fulfilling the task of the progressive development and codification of international law, which is the raison d'etre of the Commission, to the benefit of the member states, because ILC is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, so the ILC works for the member states. What followed is already history, and I dare say a good one. In 2020, Niloufer and I produced the first issues paper dedicated to the law of the sea issues in connection with sea level rise, followed in 2022 by the second issues paper, co-authored by Patricia Galvao Teles and Juan José Ruda Santolaria, regarding statehood and protection of persons. Then in 2023, Niloufer and I produced the additional paper to the first issues paper, thus bringing further contributions on the law of the sea aspects of the topic. In 2024, the other two co-chairs produced the additional paper to the second issues paper, refining the findings on statehood and protection of persons, and they were followed by the final consolidated report of 2025, and very importantly, the adoption of the final report, including concrete proposals on all three subtopics, and also as to the way forward. The work behind these papers and the efforts dedicated to the preparation of the debates in the Commission, in the study group, but also in the plenary, as well as the constant and very meaningful interaction with the UN member states. This effort was huge, And indeed, this interaction was very important. And I have already mentioned we started this interaction even before we decided to embark on this, on the inclusion of the topic on the agenda. I'm convinced that it would be very beneficial for any topic which might be envisaged to be included on the agenda of the ILC to be consulted prior to that with the member states to check whether it is feasible or not. But our interaction with the member states was very specific. It was very interesting, very particular, because on one hand, the interest for the topic increased exponentially from 24 statements in the 6th committee in 2017, so before the inclusion of the topic, states were already starting to ask for the inclusion, to 73 statements in 2024 and 76 in 2025, but the number of states, in fact, is much bigger because many statements are presented on behalf of regional groups, on behalf of regional international bodies. So if my team, the court has counted correctly, last year in 2025, those 76 statements have expressed the positions of over 150 states. So this is important. But on the other hand, the conclusions we reached and the possible solutions we have envisaged, especially the famous freezing of the baselines, which was included in the first issues paper, were endorsed by the interested member states and also used by them in their national practice. They were also included in regional and cross-regional declarations. I have already mentioned them, but I want to mention the 2021 Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise of the Pacific Islands Forum members, and also the September 2021 Declaration of the 39 heads of state and government of the Alliance of Small Island States. Such practice, which was influenced by the work of the study group and the work of the co-chairs, returned to us, feeding our work, because the ILC works based on state practice. And in this way, we have created a two-way street engagement and influence, which was very interesting, and I would say even unique. The time we have for this presentation does not allow me to go into all aspects related to the substance of our work, but I will refer to the most salient ones: the preservation of the maritime zones. I've already mentioned the findings of the ICJ on that. The stability of maritime boundaries, or non-applicability of the rebus sic stantibus rule. The strong presumption of continuity of statehood, I've already mentioned that a little bit, and the various solutions proposed for the protection of persons affected by sea level rise. But one cross-cutting principle, which we have identified already from the work for the first issues paper, but which is strongly supporting the findings and proposals from all three subtopics, is the principle of legal stability, security, certainty, and predictability. This general principle of law is clearly evidenced by states in their statements before the 6th committee, in their submissions, in their statements in the General Assembly, in the Security Council meetings, and so amply demonstrated by the co-chairs and the study group in the first and especially in the additional paper to the first issues paper, applies to all aspects related to sea level rise, including freezing baselines and outer limits of maritime zones, the issue of rebus sic stantibus, continuity of statehood, and the solutions envisaged for the protection of persons. The final report, adopted last year, encapsulates the findings from all issues papers and debates within the Commission over the 8 years during which the topic was considered. I speak under the control of Niloufer. So on the issue of preservation of maritime zones, the conclusion of the ILC was that there is no provision in UNCLOS that imposes an obligation on states, all states, again, not just UNCLOS parties, to update baselines, geographical coordinates, or outer limits of maritime zones and charts once duly deposited with the Secretary General in accordance with the Convention. And it also mentions that consequently states are under no obligation to update these baselines, geographical coordinates, and outer limits. So this would, and this is important, create an equitable an opposite approach would create an inequitable outcome, because third states in this way would gain rights in maritime zones, in particular in the exclusive economic zone, to the detriment of the coastal states. In fact, The whole effort of the ILC on this topic is well, dedicated to the preservation of the existing rights of the affected states. The solution was, as I mentioned already, widely endorsed by states in the practice, and the final consolidated report also mentions in paragraph 483 the fact that the statements of states, their behavior, their practice are strong indications of general practice and opinion juris reflecting agreement that states are not prevented from preserving existing baselines and maritime zones, that there is no obligation for states to update nautical charts or coordinates. In other words, well, there is already a customary norm regarding this. On the issue of stability of maritime boundaries, again, very importantly, in the ILC, we have reached the conclusion that the principle of fundamental change of circumstances, rebus sic stantibus, codified by Article 62, paragraph 1 of the VCLT, does not apply to maritime delimitation agreements because they are covered by the exclusion for treaties establishing boundaries under the same Article 62, paragraph 2a of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. And there is overwhelming support of states for that, already since the beginning. Perhaps this was the first conclusion which was most widely endorsed by the member states in the Sixth Committee and in the submissions to the Commission. The final consolidated report considers that there is already a customary norm in that regard. And as I mentioned in my separate opinion to the advisory opinion of last year, I cannot but agree with this finding. As to the issue of statehood, in case the entire territory is covered by water, as you know, the presumption of continuity was also endorsed by the court, as I mentioned, but the ILC stresses the fact that it is supported by the principle of legal stability. It is supported by equity. It is perfectly coherent with the preservation of maritime zones. On the protection of persons, the issues paper proposed several solutions based, as evidenced by the final report, on the principle of protection of human dignity and on the principle of international cooperation in the application of the existing international human rights protection frameworks. The final report mentions a combination of needs-based and rights-based approaches as the basis for protection, the need to delineate the human rights obligations of the affected state and the host states, and the particular need to protect persons in vulnerable situations. And as practical tools, the final report mentions special climate mobility agreements, pathways and other alternative arrangements, humanitarian visas, and similar administrative policies and measures to prevent the loss of nationality and statelessness. I have already mentioned the earlier the pronouncements of ICJ regarding non-refoulement and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And last but not least, it is essential that the final report included a series of possible future avenues. Paragraphs 58 and 59 evoke the need for a contemporary, that is in fact an evolutive interpretation of various instruments and rules of international law. In the opinion last year, we have also included a reference to the evolutive interpretation of UNCLOS. And I think it's important that these avenues and suggestions by the ILC on the way forward be very thoroughly studied, examined. Resolutions or declarations in relation to continuity of statehood or the preservation of sovereignty and the maintenance of membership of the United Nations and other international organizations, the adoption of binding or non-binding instruments applicable to the protection of persons, the creation of mechanisms within the UN or other international organizations and bodies to strengthen cooperation in addressing the negative effects of sea level rise, or interpretative statements of UNCLOS to the sense that there is no obligation to update baselines. Although I think the ICJ pronouncement on the issue perhaps solves already the problem. To conclude, it was indeed a great journey which brought important outcomes. But it also brought together not just new ideas and concepts or reinvented ones that were given new meaningful purpose. Not only that, it provided tangible solutions, which I have no doubt will benefit the so many states and populations affected. Not only that, it created special synergies between institutions, like between ILC and ICJ, because the ILC's work and the ICJ's advisory opinion are no doubt complementary and timely, arriving almost at the same time, and paving the way for further important developments of the topic at international level. Not only that this journey was about an unprecedented level of complexity, and indeed for quite a long time no topic on the ILC's agenda equaled the complexity, intertwined combination of theoretical and practical legal features, political importance, as well as interdisciplinarity of sea level rise in relation to international law. Not only that it inaugurated a new level of interaction with the member states, and also a new degree of promptness in assuming the topic, in delivering solutions, and a new level of concreteness of these solutions. Not only that the work within the study group was quite effective, I would say, being organized to match to the largest extent possible the work of a special rapporteur by taking over what was useful and efficient, but also benefiting from the collective approach of a study group. So perhaps more study groups or perhaps more co-special rapporteurs could be appointed. We have already inaugurated co-chairs of the Commission, and Niloufer was one of the co-chairs. So it was a great experience. And not only that, this topic put on the agenda perhaps the most consensual issue from the political perspective among its membership in decades. But this journey, and this is perhaps the most important part for me, brought together extraordinary people and excellent friends like my former co-chairs, including prominently Niloufer Oral, and these are people who made possible for international law to rise even above rising seas. And I'm looking forward to the future evolutions in the context of the follow-up resolution to the advisory opinion. I've heard news that the first zero draft was distributed, was circulated. I haven't seen that, so don't ask me about that. I can't comment on that, but I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also looking forward to the General Assembly debate on sea level rise this September. This will also be very interesting, and perhaps if this journey ended, a new journey will start. And I'm looking forward to see that. I'm looking forward to the debate that follows, and thank you so much for your attention. And I apologize for misspelling some titles, but I forgot to take my reading glasses. So, thank you so much.